Welcome, listeners, to another live broadcasting episode of Pateo Radio, brought to you via Finding Voices Radio. My special guest for tonight comes from the United States of America, and her name is Karen Hoots. Karen, please welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Johan. I'm very happy to be with you tonight.
Okay, yeah, to me it's quite an honor because I've studied your work and I've seen what you've been doing. And we will go into that a lot, I think, tonight. Here it is night. At your place it's not night, of course. But first, can you introduce yourself to the listeners? What is your background, Karen? Can you share some insights with that?
Delighted to. I'm an American living just outside of Washington, D.C. And the reason that I'm so happy also to be with you is that I studied development economics at the Gemeente Universiteit van Amsterdam.
Okay.
En ik kan het in het Nederlands doorgaan, maar met Johan in overleg begrijp ik dat er Engels luisteraars zijn, dus gaan we het in het Engels verder doen. I was just saying to many of the listeners in Holland that I studied development economics at the University of Amsterdam, and I speak Dutch. So that's one of the reasons I'm very, very happy to be broadcasting in Holland. But I understand also that there are English speakers. So since English is my native language, we're going to do the interview in English. I just wanted to speak a little Dutch so that the Dutch people knew that I'm fluent in their language. But anyway, so after graduating from the University of Amsterdam, and by the way, the reason I was in Holland was this was in the 70s when we had the Vietnam War going on, and one of the things that they said was love it or leave it. And I was very angry about what was going on in Vietnam, and so I went shopping for a country between just the year before I graduated during the summer. And first I went to the south of France, which was very nice. Mm-hmm. But there was a dienstweigeraar in Holland who was in the south of France, and I ended up going back to Amsterdam. And then he came and lived with me in my dorm room during my senior year. And then I decided I was going to be going to Holland. You can decide whether or not it was for political reasons, as you wish. But one of the things that I did when I was in Amsterdam, there's a man named Sietse Bascha who was working on it Angola Comité, which was working to help. This was when there was this war for independence with Portugal going on, and but it was also called the South Africa Committee, and they were also working very hard on publicizing the apartheid problems in South Africa. Anyway, so that was what I was doing in Amsterdam. I was studying economics, I was learning Dutch, and I was working with Angola Comité. But then I went back to the United States, and I have to tell you that I had this real feeling of going into the heart of the beast when I left Holland, because I felt when I was in Amsterdam that I had escaped from something, and it was only many years later that I understand now exactly why I had that feeling, and that is because we are ring-fenced in the United States with disinformation. When I went and worked at the U.S. Export-Import Bank, and then I worked for the World Bank for 21 years. So I had a background in development economics, which is what I'm using more now than my legal background. But anyway, so I was working in the World Bank, and I'm sort of a naive person, which is to say that I usually believe what I see and what people tell me. But the other thing about it is the World Bank is many things to many people, but it's been hijacked by a very corrupt group which owns all of the central banks of the world. And there are secret societies working behind that group. And as I tackle one group, and when I say it's not me, I've started working together with whistleblowers. And as my story gets more and more visibility, people that didn't know about me start sharing their information. And it's very difficult sometimes to figure out what's really going on because there's so much secrecy in the financial system. But in any event, so I've been, some people say I've been going down the rabbit hole along with everybody else that has been there. And so there isn't a day goes by that I don't get a very nice surprise in my inbox. So I'll tell you, one of the emails that I just got a couple of days ago was from a man who has spent his career working with the cetaceans. That's the whales and the porpoises. And anyway, but I'm trying to tell you that I have a pretty good understanding of how things are working. And I share that information with as many people as I can because it's very, very important for everyone to know what I know, since we all need to work together to get rid of this terrible corruption. And when I say this terrible corruption, I'd like to see who my audience is, and then I focus on the level of comfort that they have in the corruption. But there is a lot going on behind the scenes, and as I learn about it, I'm never sure, especially the newest layer, I'm never sure what that is until enough people start working with me on that problem. So I'm just the face of a network of world whistleblowers. That's who I am, if you're trying to figure that out. And I have a special affinity for Holland, having learned to speak Dutch and stayed in contact for many, many years with the wonderful friends that I made when I was living on the Albert Kuipstraat. Or actually, I was on the Van Ostaadestraat, and I used to go shopping at the Albert Kuip Markt. And I just had a wonderful time in Holland. I love Holland.
Okay, great, Karen. Thank you very much. For the English listeners, you used a strange word for them, but what you mean by dienstweiger is a conscious objector who doesn't want to do military service, so then people can also understand that part of your story. I think most of the listeners here know that the Federal Reserve is not federal and doesn't have any reserve, so that's clear to, I think, all the listeners here. But the World Bank, you discovered in 2007 or maybe before that things were not going, honestly, to describe it like that. Can you describe what you found and what happened to you after you were starting to blow the whistle?
Right, but I actually went into the World Bank knowing that there was a problem because the man who helped write the treaty for the World Bank, the Articles of Agreement, was a Dutch lawyer named Aaron Broches, and he was the longest-serving general counsel. And he had retired from the World Bank when I went to Washington, but somehow I found him, and because I knew that I wanted to work at the World Bank, I played the cello. He was a very good pianist, almost concert pianist level. My cello playing is not of that caliber, but so I would play Beethoven sonatas with him, and then he would tell me about what he knew about the World Bank. And he was there when Robert McNamara came to the World Bank in 1968. And he warned me, when the Pentagon comes to the World Bank as its president, that there's no way for the lawyer to do the lawyer's job in the World Bank. And the lawyer's job in the World Bank is more important than the presidency, because what the lawyer does is they serve as a liaison between the presidency and the board, which is the rest of the world. And the United States had something called the Gentleman's Agreement, which was that the countries of the world would allow the United States to simply handpick the president of the World Bank. And this went on for 66 years, from the time that the World Bank was created in 1944 at the end of World War II, until 2010, which is when the Gentleman's Agreement ended. And part of the Gentleman's Agreement is that the International Monetary Fund, which is right across the World Bank, the street from the World Bank, which had always been headed by a European, the managing director. So both halves of the Gentleman's Agreement were suspended, and the countries of the world have their pick of whoever they want, and they do not have to pick an American as the president of the World Bank, and they do not have to pick a European as the managing director of the IMF. And if you try to figure out what is the difference between the IMF and the World Bank, I'll tell you the way I understand it. It's not the usual thing that's said. The way I understand it is that the World Bank and the IMF are a compromise. They took this one organization and they divided it right down the middle, and they gave half of it to the Europeans and half of it to the United States. But when the two organizations work on the financial sector of the 188 member countries, there is no way to distinguish who's doing what to whom. So they really are, for all practical purposes, one organization. And when these organizations have their, every 6 months, they gather, all of the countries gather together in a big conference. And whenever they do that, the representative from the country is usually the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Development. It's that one individual who is on the board of governors for both of these entities. And then they have boards of executive directors that are resident there. And that's the job of the lawyer, is to serve as the liaison between the board and the presidency. And so there was an agreement that was started 3 years after the World Bank came into, started working. And that was in 1947. They have a memorandum which said that the board would sit back and wait for the president to propose something, and then the board would vote it up or down. And when I saw all of this corruption, and, I had been there, and I got to know the executive directors, and after I was fired illegally, I went back and met with several of them. And I've stayed in touch with them through the years, and I've stayed in touch with many of the countries. I've been writing all the embassies in Washington, and also recently I started writing the embassies in New York. And I testified for the European Parliament in 2011, and the legal department of the European Parliament sent a letter to the World Bank with a very detailed chronology. And you can see the chronology. You can see what it was that I was reporting up the ranks if you go to my website, which is KAHUDES.net. My last name is Hudes, Hudes. My first name is Karen, and the A is for my middle name. But in any event, this morning, my website stopped functioning. So I had to go back to my, the people that helped me with that to try to get it up and running again. A lot of people like to debate about whether I am for real, and you can find out how real I am by looking at a chronology, which shows you exactly, what I was doing at what stage, and my understanding of how all of this corruption is working increased as I discovered what was hidden. And one of the strengths that I have is the fact that I'm naive. And so if you look on my website, you will see that I'm writing letters to all these people because I didn't realize the level of corruption and how their functioning had been completely compromised. But what I can tell you, if people are worried about where we are and is the world all falling apart because of this corruption, no, because the World Bank is a cooperative, and I was helped in 2004 by a political scientist who came to the World Bank and showed me a very accurate modeling tool. It uses game theory modeling. And by the way, at a certain point, I went to the University of Amsterdam to their modeling people, and I said, the strength of this game theory analysis, and I want you to keep track of where things are. And so I'm sure that, and I've been writing to the Ministry of Ministerie voor Buitenlandse Zaken, and I can tell you, I speak to these people too. I had a buurvrouw on the Van der Stadestraat named Alleen van Hardenberg. She died recently. She was a psychiatrist and a medical doctor, and she was my guru because she did a lot of alternative medicine. You know that people in Holland are very up to date on that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I stayed in touch with her through the years, and her wonderful family, some of whom, one of them is living in Canada. But anyway, so when Hélène was dying, I wrote to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and at that point I was a little bit nervous about traveling around because my story wasn't very public, and so I wanted the people in the Netherlands to know that I was going to be in Holland, and I wrote them, and I also wrote the people in Norway and other places so that people knew where I was traveling, and I figured that somebody might be watching out for me. I was hoping that was the case. Anyway, so on the train to visit Hélène, all of a sudden, 6 people showed up and started talking to me on the train. I was carrying flowers, and we started talking in Dutch, and they were, we were just, they were asking me where I was going and what I was doing, and I thought this is extraordinary to be surrounded by 6 people who are all talking to me, and who am I? And anyway, I knew pretty well who these people were. And, so I started playing with them, and they were saying, oh, your Dutch is pretty good. And I said, well, spoken is one thing, but written is something quite different. I said, for example, when you write the Ministerie voor Buitenlandse Zaken, you better be careful and not write that with 2 Ks. And my Dutch audience will know what it was that I called their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Anyway, so that's how it is. That's how it goes. I've been working on many, many levels with the governments of the world. And it's no coincidence that the Russia Today TV has given me 2 interviews. The second interview went on for 30 minutes. You can see that, if you go to the Russia Today TV website and just Google my name. And they broadcast that for 4 times. And of course, I went back to the military the minute Chuck Hagel was appointed as the Secretary of Defense in the United States. And I went to the group that knew about the strength of that stakeholder modeling tool. What that tool was predicting was that if the United States would get rid of the Federal Reserve and start playing by the rules, that we, meaning all of our allies, would have a very good prospect going forward. We would avoid a currency war, and there would be a gradual transition of power to the East as the Eastern developing countries' economies grew. Because what has happened in the past is when an economy is eclipsed by another economy, the only way you settle that transition in power is through a world war. And we didn't want any more world wars. That was one of the reasons the World Bank was created. And I took my lesson from Aaron Broches, and then I borrowed the stakeholder modeling tool. And I just stayed in touch with all of the countries of the world, telling them that I was trying as best I could to inform the American people. And I had no idea how difficult that was going to be, because I didn't understand that the media was owned and controlled by the same group that owns and controls the Federal Reserve. And in case you're wondering who is that group, it's your queen, it's the other black nobility, and those people have gotten totally corrupted by this power that they've had through the generations. They do terrible things, and they're all working together through the Jesuits. So you can say, oh, it's the bankers, oh, it's the Vatican's bankers, which of course everybody is now very, very angry at, and people have been critical of me because I'm not talking about the Rothschilds and these other banking families. But you have to understand their role. They are the Vatican's bankers, and it's the Vatican and your black nobility and the Queen of the Netherlands that are calling the shots. And the Rothschilds are just there as tools of that group. Yes, they've done terrible things. I'm not exonerating them. But there is a lot of anti-Semitism that's coming out. People are worried that we're going to have a response which is very similar to what happened just before Hitler came into power. And we've learned from our lesson. First of all, I'm not judging any of these people. What I'm saying to people when they ask me, where are the bankers in jail? What I'm saying to them is that before you have got the transition, the smooth transition that we all need, we don't want a currency war. You have to do what you do when you're going after the mafia, which is you find the people in the lower ranks of the mafia and you give them, you get them to squeal on the Don. That's where we are right now. Don't try to throw everybody in jail. Let's just go after the culprits that are responsible, that are calling the shots. And we know very accurately who they are. And a lot of people also say, well, how can you be calling out these people and still be alive? And the answer is that I have not gotten any further, any faster than a whole group of people know about the information. So if anybody wants, to solve their problem by killing me, they will not have solved their problem. They will only have made their problem much worse. Because I am not bringing out secret documents. I am telling people about what's been happening behind the scenes in a cover-up. So the things that are going on behind the scenes in the cover-up are not going to be disappear if something happens to me. People are going to come and find out what they are with a vengeance. So that's pretty much, I'm sure, Johan, you must have a lot of questions for me. One of the things that happened when I was talking on radio in Ireland is people were saying, this is all very interesting, but you're telling it from an American perspective. Why don't you tell us something that we know, that applies to us? And so, Johan, maybe you can help me do that. Tell me what your audience needs to know.
Yeah, but you already made a lot of reference to the situation in the Netherlands or Europe. For your information, the Queen you talk about has transferred her power to her firstborn, but that's not really relevant, I think. And I also see that the monarchy in Britain, Elizabeth Windsor, is also playing a key role in this whole play. So,
she has been deposed, by the way. She's no longer the Queen. She was convicted of child trafficking and lost her crown. But the news isn't telling anybody that.
Oh, I've missed it, perhaps. Was it very recent, Karen?
No, it happened a year ago. And when this happened, that was when the Pope Benedict stepped down. And you will notice that Pope Francis doesn't go into his papal apartments. That's because the Vatican is being dismantled because of now we're not talking about the Catholic faith. We're not talking about the religion. We're simply talking about the corruption, the financial corruption. That's all we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay, so that's new for me. I have to dig into that, but that will come. Can you share your view on the shutdown and the power play that was going on in Washington?
Right, but let me just follow up a little bit so that people understand how this all happened. There were Native children in Canada who were buried in mass graves, and there were some Native children in Canada who accompanied the Queen and then disappeared and were never heard of again. So this case was brought, and the evidence was presented, and the consequences followed as a result. But going back to the United States, I can tell you what's happening in the United States is very, very dramatic, and we're very lucky that when the country was set up, it was set up with 50 separate states that are then combining in a federal country. And most of the corruption is concentrated in the federal government, and so that's why it's possible for the citizens to tackle the corruption and still have a government. Some of the governors are, have been caught up and co-opted, but we're also actively working with the counties because the states consist of separate counties, and we're working with the counties and the sheriffs in those counties. And the legal situation is that the World Bank, it does many, many things. One of the things it does is it issues bonds on the capital markets, $180 billion worth of bonds. And then it takes the money that it gets from those bonds and it invests that money, and the profits are then used to finance the budget inside the World Bank. Mm-hmm. And the financial statements that are going to the bondholders under the securities laws have to be accurate. So when I was in the World Bank legal department, I saw that there was a very big cover-up, which, there were many cover-ups, but the one that was the biggest, and the one that I've been using in my litigation, was in the Philippines, where I was working in that country, and I was working together with the man who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in the Philippines. And what we uncovered there was that the man who was the president of the Philippines, Joseph Estrada, was corrupt. And what he did was he took the assets of the country and sold them to his cronies. And one of his cronies was a man named Lucio Tan, who actually is Chinese. And he owned Philippine Airlines, which was borrowing from the second largest bank, Philippine National Bank. And the employees owned shares in Philippine National Bank, and those shares ended up in the hands of Lucio Tan. And they were more than 10% of the shares of that bank. So under the securities laws in the Philippines, they had to notify the securities regulators, and they failed to do that. So they broke the securities laws, and I wrote a letter to the man who was in charge of the lending program. I was just the lawyer, and I said, here's a letter that I want you to sign and give to the government telling them that we will be unable to complete dispersing. There was a loan to clean up the financial sector. This was after the East Asia financial crisis. It was at the end of the 1990s. And Vinay Bhargava, instead of signing that letter, had me reassigned. And I didn't like that because the man who reassigned me had been hired because I knew Larry Summers, who was the Secretary of the Treasury at that time. Larry Summers' son and my daughter were in the same elementary school. And whenever there was a meeting, the parents would go to the meeting, and I would find Larry Summers in the hall, and I would chase him, and I would complain. That was, after a while. And our children stayed in the same schools. When they graduated elementary school and went to junior high, they were still in the same junior high school. So I would follow Larry Summers around. He couldn't get away from me. I would follow him and complain about the corruption and ask him what he was doing. But at a certain point when the general counsel was being replaced at the World Bank, I knew who one of the candidates was. I didn't know that person personally, but a colleague told me that this man would be a wonderful addition to the World Bank legal department. He was one of the candidates. And I went to Larry Summers and I lobbied for that guy to be hired. And so that was the one who had me transferred. I was very angry at that. That was a betrayal. I was fighting corruption, and he was pulling me off the case. So, I wasn't going to take that sitting down. I went to the man who was representing the Dutch government on the board, Peter Steck, and Peter Steck and I went and saw Jim Wolfenson to complain about the corruption in the Philippines. And Jim Wolfenson told Peter Steck and I, and Peter Steck at that point was the chair of a board committee called Committee on Development Effectiveness. Now, it's not effective development when you transfer a lawyer who's fighting corruption in a country. So Peter had a lot of clout with Jim Wolfenson. Peter then turned around and made sure that the man who had reassigned me, Ko Yung Chung, left the World Bank. But anyway, so there was this corruption that Jim Wolfenson was not solving, and I didn't like that at all. So I went to the Treasury Department in different places. I went to their legal department. I went back to Larry Summers, and when the Treasury Department, after 4 years, didn't do anything, I went to the U.S. Congress. And I have been going back to the Treasury Department repeatedly until it finally dawned on me that the Treasury Department and what we call the super entity, which is the companies that own all of the banks, that they were just actually the same group, that the U.S. Treasury Department has been totally co-opted by the Federal Reserve System and their owners. That's called state capture. That's what I've documented. And where things are with the American people is I have told them this. And if you go on my website, you will see the letters. And if you want to see what the current status is, you can look at what I tell people that are following me on Twitter. That's called Karen Hudas, Twitter at Karen Hudas. Or you can, see what I'm saying on Facebook. But I have to tell you that Facebook is censoring me. There are things that they will not let me post. And then what I have to do is I have to go to an article somewhere and make a comment and then post that article. Facebook will let me do that, and then you just have to read the comment section, and you can get a very accurate picture. But where things are in the United States is, I was telling you, as I tell people what's going on, groups come to me. And it turns out that there are some very active, feisty whistleblowers in the United States. One of them is Mark Nowitzki, and he also recently appeared on Russia Today TV and was talking about domestic surveillance. So what we have been doing is we have been revealing all of this corruption to the American people, and they're quite adamant about taking back their government and not letting this corrupt group of bankers continue to harm the world. And that's where we are. And this stakeholder analysis that I was telling you about, it's 90 to 95% accurate. One of the whistleblowers I've been working with is a Scottish whistleblower, Elaine Colville. And I've gotten 3 statements up on the UK Parliament website. And Elaine has joined me the last time in September. Sorry, it was in July. And at that point, that was the Public Administrative Select Committee that was asking whether the complaints process in the United Kingdom is working. And what we both said was, no, it's absolutely not working. And furthermore, the UK Parliament is falling down on the job. Because, I said, I've been complaining to you twice, and you haven't done anything. But the first time that I got a statement up on the UK Parliament, a UK lawyer said, Karen, it's now time to go to the credit rating agencies. So I went to Standard & Poor and Fitch Rating and Moody's. And what happened was Standard & Poor downgraded the United States, and then the Attorney General, Eric Holder, started suing Standard & Poor. So Standard & Poor said, you know what, we've thought about it, and actually we think since the United States is the reserve currency for the world, maybe we don't have to downgrade the U.S. Of course, this was a double message, because don't forget the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are now trading among themselves using offsets, and at the end of the day, any remaining balance is being settled in gold, not dollars. So the U.S. is on the way to losing its reserve currency status, and of course the Chinese have gone on record that this should happen immediately. So what's happened is that there's a new credit rating agency, the Universal Credit Rating Agency, and it was started by Russia and China. And I'm meeting with their chief executive officer in a month. And I've gone and told, the Army that if their currency is not strong, the United States Army, the military is not strong either. What is our national security interest? And the other thing that stakeholder analysis was telling me was that we were going to lose Germany as our ally. We were going to lose the rest of Europe as our ally if we did not start playing by the books, if we didn't stop this terrible corruption. And so when the Federal Reserve refused to return 300 tons of gold to Germany in January, I went back and I said, this is what you're beginning to see. And then there was a very good interview on the 3rd largest website for German business, where they had me write an interview, and then they wanted to drill down. In other words, they wanted to go into great detail about the meaning of when this military helicopter flew over the U.S. consulate in Frankfurt and broke all the dishware. They said, what does this mean? How would I know what it meant? But I Googled it, and I saw that there was a German official who didn't want to be named, who said, this is a shot across the bow. That's, a statement for, we want to get your attention. And then I went back to the U.S. Department of Defense, and I said, this is what I've been warning you was going to happen. And I warned Chuck Hagel in 2008. And I can show them, because having gone to Yale Law School, I know how to document this. The day after I spoke to Chuck Hagel personally, he had a book signing. I sent an email to Chuck Grassley is a senator. I sent an email to his aide, giving him, the details of what I had said to Chuck Hagel. I said, playing cat and mouse on these issues, not resolving this problem, is going to land the United States in a currency war. And then, I said, here we are. Here's the currency war. We have a very good way to resolve this and not have a currency war, and that is simply to play by the rules. So you see, I'm uncovering this corruption, and the chance that we will resolve it is 90 to 95%. And I'm making sure that everybody knows this, including the people that are in these corrupt banks. And so what I'm getting is, this morning, there's a whistleblower in one of these banks who said, I have very good information about the corruption inside the banks. Somebody gave a memorandum and said I had signed it when I did not. And I went to the, the managers of this bank, and they fired me. He said, do you know anybody in the in the federal government, can you help me with this? I happen to know some very senior people in the banking regulators. I said, yeah, I can help you with that. Let's go to town. So that's where we are. We have these crooks hog-tied.
That's great. That's really great, Karen. What is the time scale? How fast can the turnover or the repair, so to say, how fast can it occur? Can you give us an idea about that?
Yes. I've been on the phone with people who, all right, I can tell you what I know. Mm-hmm. And when you get up to these echelons, I don't know it with the same certainty that I know all of the things that have happened before then. So I'll tell you what I think. I may have it slightly wrong, but I'm reasonably sure that I have it more or less accurate. Okay? What has happened in the international financial system is that all of the gold that underpins the financial system, the world's wealth, has gone into hiding. It's there, it's on deposit in these banks, and these banks are bound and determined that they're going to hold on to it, and they're not going to let anybody know about it because they don't want us to be rescued. They don't want us to have a strong banking system. They want to be the banking system, and they're not going to step aside and allow it. So that's where it is, and there are protocols, I guess is what they call it. If people want to know about exactly where the bank is, the gold is deposited, and I've been talking about it, and people have been saying, Karen, why would we take your word for it? And then this morning, somebody sent me an email with a link to testimony in the UK Parliament about the 500,000 metric tons of gold. So it's real gold, it's really there, but we have got to shame those bankers and get them to release the gold. I know the person who has the records and is the legal signatory for those accounts, but the banks are refusing to honor that signature. So what's holding it up is that people have got to believe the information that I'm giving them. And I was contacted by somebody who said that they're in touch with one of the, there are different words for this function. They're the ones who hold the keys to getting the gold out. And he told me that he's in touch with one of these people, and that person's going to help me. But I think there's a lot of questions that need to be resolved before he'll really help me. One of the questions is what's going to happen to the bankers after they release the gold. Are we going to throw them all in jail? And, people have to be on board with this. I was reading, there are comments after I go on interviews. I had a recent interview with Greg Hunter, who's a reporter who left one of the major broadcasting agencies because he was too honest and too good and insisted on telling the truth to the American people. So he's now set up his own broadcasting enterprise, and I've had a series of interviews with him. Anyway, so Greg Hunter just put an interview up on Sunday, and then I was reading the comments, and the people that are commenting are saying any number of things. Some of them are saying we have to throw all the bankers in jail. Now, if the bankers think that releasing the gold is going to land them in jail, do you think they're going to release the gold? No. Somebody else is sending me an email about whether there should be a jubilee, whether all the debt should be extinguished or not. I think it's going to be kind of difficult to get people to release the gold until there's been some kind of a contour of what this is going to look like. Think of a big table, which is for the first time is transparent. I'm sharing this dialogue now with your listeners, and people have got to, we've got the people for the very first time, thinking about the fate of their dishonest bankers, and these bankers are not going to let go of this gold until they know what their fate is going to be. And what I said, I'm just thinking out loud, but what I said is, think about when you're trying to end the mafia. You don't tell everybody in the mafia that they're going to jail. You have to have people that are going to finger the Don. And that's where we are now. I think what's going to happen is that people are going to have to understand what the dynamics are. If they want every single dishonest banker locked up, we're not going to have any progress, and we're all going to lose out. We're going to totally lose out. And what's going to happen is our currency is going to crash because nobody has confidence in the paper currency anymore, certainly not in the U.S. dollar. Now, they do have confidence in the U.S. dollar. What they don't have confidence in is the Federal Reserve note, which is how the dollars are denominated. We've delegated the duty of issuing our currency to these private bankers. We have to take that back. What I'm talking about now is I'm talking about the transition. I'm talking about the fact that we already know where we're headed. We're not headed to one world currency. That's what those crooked bankers wanted. No, we're not going there. The BRICS don't want it, and nobody wants it. But the question is, how do we get to individual currencies backed by value? I'm not saying that we have to have a gold standard anymore. I'm not even saying we have to have our currencies backed by precious metals. I'm saying that each country has got to decide what asset they're going to back their currency with. You could conceive of, Ecuador is going to back their currency in bananas. I don't care. Mm-hmm. Seriously, we've got to have some kind of a concept about where we're headed. And we also have to have the concept that this is transition, because no matter where we're headed, we're going to have to retrofit it as we learn from what works. Exactly. Humanity is going to be free to start figuring out what works. And if you're asking me what are some of the mechanics for getting that kind of a process going, my job as lawyer at the World Bank was to go into a country and to talk to that country and to figure out what made sense and to try to see if we could have that happen. And it was a wonderful job. And as soon as those countries understood that that was what I was doing, I wasn't the World Bank banker that was going there to saddle them with bad projects. I was going there to make what they wanted possible for them. And the very first thing that you need in that kind of a situation is you need transparency so that it's all the people in that country that are figuring out what works for them. It shouldn't be just the top echelon. So that's one of the preconditions, that you're in a dialogue with people who are included. And the depth of the inclusion, that's one of the indicators as to whether you've got a good process going. There's another indicator, and that is whether, you call them whistleblowers, it's whether the information is flowing and whether people who are on the inside that see what's actually happening are being punished for letting people know what's actually happening. If you want to figure out whether you know what's going on, you have to look to see what's happening to people who are telling you what's going on. And there are very few countries where you're rewarding people who are giving you the information. The truth tellers are not being protected. No. So that's my contribution, is to say that I can help people understand whether they are really finding out what's going on. But to find out what's really going on, you have to be able to understand that information. You have to demand it. You have to be actively involved in it. I mean, just because, and this is one of the things that I'm finding out. I'll go to people, and at great personal sacrifice, I'm in a position to tell people what's going on, and they're not doing anything with it. So one of the conversations I'm having, one of the things that I found out is that in the United States, in our Constitution, there's a right for the citizens to consent to be governed. And there's a provision in Article 5 that says that if the state legislatures demand a constitutional convention, the U.S. Congress shall grant the people a constitutional convention. So back in 1929, Wisconsin wrote a very angry letter saying, we are the 34th or 35th state. That means that 2/3 of the states have requested a constitutional convention. Where is our constitutional convention? The Congress has no right to not give us this. It's mandatory, and we don't have it. And in the interim, more states have asked for a constitutional convention. It's up to 49 of the 50 states. So one of the whistleblowers sent me this letter from Wisconsin, which I put up on my Facebook page. And I said, okay, So where is the Constitutional Convention that we're entitled to? I have gotten so many emails from people telling me that if we have a Constitutional Convention, it's going to be worse. Our Constitution is going to be eviscerated. These people haven't seen that their constitutional rights are not being exercised, that there must be something wrong there, and they're daring to tell me that they don't. It reminds me of my house cats. I don't let them out, and if you open the door, they won't go out the door. This is how the American people are acting with their right to a constitutional convention. We're afraid to fix the problem. This is absurd. So I go back to these people and I say, why don't you learn how to think critically, and then I'll spend some time answering your emails. I'm getting very, what can I say, testy with this.
Yeah, I can fully understand that, Karen. The problem is that most people, hardly anyone knows their rights, and even people who do know their rights are not able to make those rights work for them. So it's very difficult. It's your profession to make use of it, but most people are far from that. So I think you can also play a role there in helping people to make sure that our rights are no longer violated. What is your
Yes. Yeah, I have to be a little more understanding. Thank you. I'll try.
Yeah, well, I see that here too in the Netherlands. There are many rights, but most people, they allow themselves to be intimidated, and they don't know what they can do, and then they get more and more into trouble, which is not necessary if you knew your rights from the start.
And the other problem is a problem of language, because a lot of these issues in the international financial sector, people deliberately write them in a way that makes it very difficult to understand them. Whereas when you break it down into what's actually happening, it's very, very simple. It's just that they've put it in a way that is going to make people think they have no right to look at it.
Yeah,
so the way actually to solve that problem is to work together with a study group, to have a group of friends or neighbors or whoever you like to work with. It's more fun that way. And to just sit there and to try to sort things through and to understand what's actually going on. Because if it's in difficult language, chances are they're trying to hide something, and you can figure it out. You have a right to figure it out. And if you work with other people, you will figure it out.
I fully agree, Karen. It's the same as in health practice and in law practice too. By using difficult words, people try to somehow fool the victims of the system, so to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a terrible. By the way, I'm really enjoying this interview. I had a terrible interview yesterday with somebody who was, just making me sound like I didn't know what I was talking about. And sometimes, because I'm in an area that's new and I'm trying to sort out what's going on, I can't guarantee it. You don't get all the footnotes and references when you're trying to uncover secret corruption. So anyway, it was a terrible conversation, and so what he was doing was he was trying to browbeat me by talking about his team of researchers that had been looking at this problem for years, and how dare I try to have an opinion on this when he had been, he was the expert and his researchers were the expert. And then there was an area that he didn't want to go into, which is about the corruption in the Vatican. He didn't want to do that. So he said the Vatican didn't have very much money. And that, the thing about it is that I used to be captain of the NYU fencing team. So I knew this was my chance to score. I was all over him. I mean, I stabbed him about 5 times. I won that interview.
Wow.
So we're not having a fencing match here with this interview, Johan. I'm not stabbing you.
Not at all. No. I'll just give you. I admire your work, and I think you're really brave. And I'm thrilled that you're here on the show. I've seen also an interview by Russian Today with you, and I don't think she was really listening to what you were saying. She just reading out the questions she had in front of her, and I didn't like that either. So I will just give you all the space you want, and that's what I've been doing in this show, to explain what you know, and I think there's much, much more you know. Can you, because the time is running out on us, can you comment a little bit on the shutdown and what happened in the power play in the U.S.? Does it have anything to do with this or not?
It has a lot to do with it. And what was going on is the whole idea of divide and conquer. They were trying to make the Republicans and Democrats unable to govern the country by being at each other's throats. That was one of the agenda. The other agenda was to try to make people worried about the debt. And what I was doing during the shutdown of the government was I was going to the National Governors Association. First, I went to my county administrator, Ike Leggett. I live in Montgomery County, which is one of the richest counties in the country. And so Ike Leggett's staff told me to go, and he's the president of the County Executives of America. And he told me he sent a staff member out who had worked with the National Governors Association, and she told me to go there. So I went there, and I wandered around their halls, and I stumbled into an office that I had forgotten existed, or I hadn't thought about it. This was the office of the financial officers and treasurers of the states. And the actual debt ceiling was not October 17th, as people were being told. It was May 17th. And since May and the time that the Congress decided to end this shutdown of the federal government, the states were not being allowed to issue bonds, or the municipalities. So I spoke to those people and I said, this corruption is going to end for once and for all. And I gave them the information. And I have a lot of information to give these officers, because the thing that I've been relying on is the fact that everybody in the world is entitled to accurate financial information, because the World Bank is issuing $180 billion worth of bonds. And in each and every country where those bonds are traded, and it's traded all over the world, the people who buy those bonds are entitled to this information. And I bought a World Bank bond, so that meant that I could sue the World Bank, which I did. And I sued KPMG, which was supposed to audit these statements. And KPMG didn't follow the auditing standards. They wouldn't allow me to speak to the audit team that was certifying the World Bank financial statements. And because anybody who reports corruption in the World Bank gets fired. So, in Colville, and there's a Mexican whistleblower who was reporting that his group was also their salaries were being paid twice. That meant that the second time the salaries were paid, this was a slush fund that either the chair of the unit or the manager in the World Bank, somebody could just run off with all this money. And it's a lot of money. The World Bank has a lot of money slushing around in there. So to summarize, every single listener can go to any of your local government agencies or your Ministry of Finance or your Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you can say, the cover-up is over. I know perfectly well that I'm entitled to accurate financial information and that my international financial system is a shambles. Oh, let me tell you one last story, and that's about Herman Wijfels and Ad Melkert.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, please do.
Yeah, okay. When Herman Wijfels was firing Paul Wolfowitz, because Paul Wolfowitz had a girlfriend at the World Bank, and he gave a big salary increase to her when he joined the World Bank. So the board fired him. And when the board was doing that, they were told some of these executive directors had gone to an establishment of what was called the New York Madam. And Eliot Spitzer, who was a governor in New York, who was attacking some of this corruption in New York, the fact that he visited this New York Madam was made public, and they're very, what can I say? In the United States, if you go to see a madam and that's made public, you have to leave your office. So Eliot Spitzer had to step down as governor. But the executive directors, what Herman Wijfels said, I think it was in the Gelderlander newspaper, was that the board was very angry at this. And then they interviewed Ad Melkert on, I'm trying to remember which of the television programs it was. Anyway, I can check. I wrote a letter, actually, to the General Assembly, all of the New York missions to the General Assembly, and I showed what the name of the newspaper was where Herman Wijfels had reported this corruption, and what the name of the television program was. And then I said that I had taken this information when I heard it, and I went back and I told the U.S. Congress, and the U.S. Congress told me to go to the Treasury Department, and I did. And then I went to the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I said, when you are blackmailing other people's ambassadors, you lose your leadership in the world. You had better fix this problem. This was in 2007 when I made that report. And of course, it was in 2010 that the U.S. lost the gentleman's agreement. And what I advised the board was, I said, when you are being intimidated like this, you have got to take back your right under the articles. And so I have told the board that they are now responsible for taking back their authority, and that they need to fire. There's a group called Allied Barton, which is owned by the same company that owns the Federal Reserve, and they provide all the security personnel to the World Bank. I should be going back in the World Bank. All of the ministers of finance settled my bondholder lawsuit by reinstating me as the acting general counsel, but I can't go back in the building. And so if your people are wondering what they can do, get in touch with your authorities and say you want to have them support me in going back into the World Bank, and that'll get things moving very quickly, actually. I should have thought of that answer right off the top.
Yeah, that's okay, Karen. You explained it now, and I think most of the listeners here will understand it. So, and I also like the approach, because then we stay in the system. We just send normal letters with normal requests, and then we'll use the system to expose all the fraudulent practices that are there, and we can solve them together. So that's what I
exactly.
Yeah. So it's the time has flown by, Karen. We're nearly out of time. I think we have 2 more minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners on on what you think will happen in the near future, apart from rescuing ourselves from this fraudulent system?
I think you actually said it yourself. We are in partnership now. Mm-hmm. I'm in partnership with you and your listeners. And that's what makes us unbeatable. And what my obligation to deliver is a process where everybody is at the table and finding out what's going on, so that when we go forward, we're not going forward with some more secrets. We're going forward with a system that everybody is involved in, and everybody is demanding information on. And if we don't do it right the first time, we'll do it right the second time and the third time, and we'll stick with it until we have a financial system that everybody likes.
Exactly, and transparency is the key word here, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Karen, really great. Thank you very much for being our guest tonight. Thank you also very much for speaking Dutch once in a while, so that also Dutch listeners feel a little bit familiar with you. The guest for next week will be a Dutch guest, so I cannot announce it in English here. I'm really happy that you were my guest. Let me mention your website for the listeners who have not got it. It's KA and then Hudes, HUDES.net. And it's online again, Karen, so I'm really happy that the problem was solved this morning. And thank you very much for sharing all the information, and I hope we can stay in touch.
Ik ook. Ontzettend bedankt nogmaals.
Graag gedaan, Karen. Okay, we have to end the show here because at 8 o'clock sharp the next show will start. But maybe you can stay online on Skype so we can have a little chat afterwards. Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you all the listeners for listening to Pateo Radio, and hope you will join the show next week. Thank you.